Russia-Ukraine war shifts fast on every front. With winter closing in, Kiev leads a global outreach to Serbia and Azerbaijan as Gulf leaders talk peace and the U.S. Senate debates harsh new sanctions. The fighting is spreading. Russia is smashing energy grids, hitting cargo ships, and bombing an Odessa stadium, even forcing prisoners into combat. In return, Ukrainian drones burn deep inside Russia, striking major retail warehouses. The fallout is worldwide. Central Asia faces fuel shortages, while a grain blockade chokes exports, spikes wheat prices, and forces Kiev to seek EU emergency cash. From warning a fallen Polish volunteer to Finnish farmers guarding the border, the human cost grows daily. Let's examine this urgent race against the freeze. Meanwhile, as Israeli military operations continue across Gaza and violence by Israeli settlers escalates in the occupied West Bank, regional concerns are mounting over the future of political efforts aimed at ending the violence. Arab and Islamic countries have warned that continued military escalation risks undermining diplomacy and destabilizing the wider region, while renewed debates within Israel over expanding military operations have added further uncertainty. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Let's get in focus. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky makes his first official visit to Serbia, a European nation that still maintains friendly ties with Russia. The historic trip highlights Belgrade's delicate balancing act between its traditional Moscow alliance and European Union pressure. Serbian President Alexander Vučić continues to reject international sanctions against Moscow, protecting vital Russian energy supplies. However, Belgrade has quietly provided aid to Ukraine and seeks to improve its standing with Western leaders while keeping its stalled EU membership bid alive. Both leaders seek strategic gains from this meeting. Zelensky signals to Russia that he is engaging its closest Balkan ally, while Vučić demonstrates regional cooperation to Brussels without abandoning his established Russian policy. A long-range Ukrainian drone strike sparked a fire at a wild berries logistics center deep inside Russia. Authorities safely evacuated 800 workers as falling debris ignited the facility's roof. Kiev actively targets the e-commerce giant, accusing it of supplying military drone components to Russian forces. This sustained campaign has already destroyed over 20% of the company's total warehouse capacity. To adapt to these mounting losses, the retailer is now launching decentralized partner storage hubs across the country. Meanwhile, air defenses continue battling massive drone salvos far from the front lines. To provide more analysis, joining us from Vienna is Mr. Sebastian Schaffer, Director Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe. Welcome, sir, to In Focus. Mr. Schaffer, do you think that Zelensky's historic visit to Serbia can truly break Belgrade's strong energy ties with Moscow?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to return. I don't think that this is the purpose of the visit. The purpose is to, on the one hand, speak with each and everyone. I think President Zelensky has shown that he is willing and able to sit down with even complicated parties. And this is his job, and he is doing his job. This is the positive aspect of it. But of course, he will not break away Alexander Vučić's ties from Moscow. Also, Gazprom is having a lot of stakes in the Serbian energy infrastructure. And this is not something that a simple visit will turn around. Nevertheless, this is two EU candidate countries, two presidents from those two EU candidate countries meeting. And I think this is something that should have been done earlier, because Serbia finally and ultimately needs to choose. Do they want to become a member of the European Union? Do they want to be an ally of Ukraine and other candidate countries and the whole EU? Or do they want to keep sitting in between the chairs? This is something that Ukraine has been doing for quite some time, pre 2014, and that was not very successful. There are other countries who have tried to do that. And ultimately, you will always have to choose if you want to be on the side of the European Union and want to have economic prosperity, or if you want to have dependence on Moscow.
Mm-hmm. With Azerbaijan's top diplomat in Kiev, is the South Caucasus shifting away from Russian influence, in your own opinion?
I think it has already shown that this is the case. The recent parliamentary elections in Armenia clearly stated that. It's also clear that Armenia has sort of felt abandoned by the Russian Federation. On the other hand, of course, we can also see that Moscow is expanding its influence on other Southern Caucasus countries, for instance, Georgia. When it comes to Azerbaijan, they have tried to have some sort of equidistance and are continuing to do this. We could see that Russia is no longer, so to say, the sole arbiter in the South Caucasus, but that doesn't mean that the South Caucasus has shifted away completely, and it doesn't also mean that Moscow cannot come back in the future.
Mm-hmm. As Russia targets cargo ships, is the Black Sea trade route now completely dead?
I wouldn't say it's completely dead, but at the moment it's not a good time for ships and ship routes. If we look at the global outreach and the global outlook, this has consequences for each and every one of us. And I think for this being the case, for having a huge impact on global economies, here specifically, of course, with regards, for instance, to agricultural exports, and this is something that targets, for instance, the Middle East, that targets Africa, that targets, but also to a certain extent, Asia. We are not outraged enough. We are not concerned enough. We have one trade route, basically shifting if it's open on an hourly basis in the Strait of Hormuz, and now we have another trade route that is actively being targeted, which is another escalation, a very unnecessary escalation from Moscow.
Mm-hmm. With Ukraine intercepting just 29% of missiles, can Kiev survive the coming winter, in your own opinion?
Well, they have to survive. This is the main point, and this is what makes me very hopeful, that the resilience that Ukraine has shown in the various aspects of the escalation in this war that is running for over a decade. It's more than 12 years that this war is ongoing. The full-scale invasion is now in its 5th year. This targeting, I'm not sure about exactly the numbers, but it's very clear that they are not able to defend their skies as much as they have been doing before. It's also very clear that there's an escalation. It's no longer only drones, but it's mainly ballistics that are targeting civilian infrastructure. War crime, by the way. But yes, if right now the situation escalates like this, we are going to see a very severe winter after an already very tough winter in the last year. And the main challenge is, of course, that Ukraine is trying to decentralize energy infrastructure, that Ukraine is trying to rebuild as quickly as possible, but there's only so much you can suffer. Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Schaffer, can Ukraine's power grid handle these massive new attacks on vital energy facilities?
I think that the big question is going to be, are they able and quick enough to rebuild what is targeted? we are seeing a very early on targeting of this energy infrastructure, which will mean that here we can expect that this will only be intensified once winter actually starts. The heating season is a couple of months away. We are also not knowing how severe that winter is going to be. But in any case, the big question is, again, are we actually letting the Russian Federation target civilian infrastructure, continuously commit war crimes without thinking about the ramifications? Because what will it mean if the energy infrastructure is not properly functioning in the next winter? That will mean that Ukrainians, rightly so, will flee the country. And this, again, will have repercussions for us in the European Union, but in Europe as a whole. And we are not talking about this. We are not talking about this, and that baffles me.
Mm-hmm. By burning wild berries helps deep inside Russia, is Kiev shifting to a total economic war?
I think it's something that will bring the war to the civilian Russian population. I don't think that we are going to see a total economic war. Yes, they have hurt wild berries to a certain extent. It's also having an economic impact. And it is also having, if you look at certain outrages, although you have to be very careful what is posted on social media, of course, when it comes from alleged Russian citizens who are affected by it. This is something that certainly is a repercussion that shows that this is not a unilateral attack that Ukraine is fighting back, and that it can also hurt the Russian Federation economically. But of course, this is not something that would ultimately have a turning of the tide in the war itself at the moment, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Do these long-range drone strikes prove that no major Russian city is truly safe anymore?
I think this is part of the plan. This is something that the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to also convey as a message. If you are targeting our civilians, your civilians should also not feel safe. And this is really something that is certainly also helping to sustain the hardship that is currently being afflicted on the Ukrainian civilian population. But on the other hand, of course, it leads to this retaliation. It leads to this further escalation. And ultimately, the question will be, is this the right way to end the war, to bring the Russian Federation to the negotiation table? I think Ukraine is rightly doing so, but the major point is going to be, without further support from the Western allies, it will be very, very complicated to convince Vladimir Putin to finally sit down and negotiate like a civilized person.
Mm-hmm. If Russia's grain blockade cuts exports in half, can the EU's emergency cash save Ukraine's farms?
Very simply, no. This is not enough. It could alleviate the situation to a certain extent, but it's not something that fully can compensate it. This is not what the aim of the fund is. This is not what the EU is capable of doing, and this is why I'm arguing in this way, because it's of course also because I know that friends of mine are sitting in Ukrainian cities, in Kiev and others, and are being targeted daily and terrorized daily. But we are simply not calculating the costs that follow from these minor actions or even inactions that we are doing. So if we are allowing that a majority of the grain exports, for instance, are being not able to be delivered, this will have consequences also for us, not only financial, but this could also lead to further food destabilization, for instance, in regions like the Middle East, like Africa, which will then, in turn, of course, also force people to seek food elsewhere. And where are they going to come? They are going to come towards the European Union, and this will ultimately also affect us.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Schaffer, will spiking global wheat prices force many countries across the region, as you mentioned, in the Middle East, Asia, to demand an urgent ceasefire?
If it would help that this brings a ceasefire, then I would actually say yes. Why not? But again, the costs of it is what we really need to take into consideration. And at the moment, I think I don't see that, with very few exceptions, probably sitting in Washington and Beijing, that there are going to be people who can convince Vladimir Putin to stop committing this genocide against the Ukrainian population.
Mm-hmm. Well, as Central Asia faces sudden fuel shortages, is Moscow losing its grip on its own backyard?
It has already started to lose its grip. I mentioned before, because, for instance, the South Caucasus is the very backyard of the Russian Federation. So this has already started. And this is something that can continue. We've seen that, for instance, in Kazakhstan. We might see it in other Central Asian countries, as you rightly mentioned. The major point here, though, is that I believe this is something that could have potentially domestic challenges for the regime in Moscow, because if you have to queue at petrol stations, being one of the oil richest countries in the world, this is something that even the Russian population will probably, although they are used to hardship and endure very hard conditions within their own state, might bring them to rethink if this is really the best way how their government is acting.
Mm-hmm. Sir, now with foreign volunteers dying in daily drone strikes, will Western public support start to fade?
I don't think so. I think quite the opposite should be the actual reaction. But nowadays, the most logical things, unfortunately, are not the things that are happening. So I don't think that this is something that will turn the tide here, because this has also been happening for quite some time. It's not the first foreign fighter who is dying on Ukrainian soil, and it will only and it will, unfortunately, also not be the last one.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was Mr. Sebastian Schaffer, Director, Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe. Thank you so much, sir, for your special insights. Now, let's move to the latest updates and developments regarding Gaza's suffering and continuous Israeli violations. According to the Palestine Chronicle, Israeli attacks across Gaza have continued despite ongoing diplomatic efforts, with humanitarian conditions worsening and civilian casualties continuing to mount. The report cites medical sources indicating that hundreds of children have been killed since the collapse of the ceasefire, while aid shortages and repeated strikes have intensified the humanitarian crisis. The report also notes growing international concern that continued military operations could further complicate negotiations over a ceasefire, humanitarian access, and post-war arrangements. At the same time, political disagreements persist over the future of Gaza, with no clear breakthrough in mediation efforts despite continued regional and international engagement. For more analysis, we're joined from Jenin by Mr. Nouman Al-Abed, political analyst. Welcome, Mr. Al-Abed, to Qnews. Now, sir, Israel's military attacks continue, while political negotiations remain stalled. So how would you assess the current balance between military escalation and diplomatic efforts?
Good afternoon to you and to your guest and to your to thank you for hosting me. No doubt that Israel cannot commit to any agreements by book and all the agreements they signed previously, whether the Palestinian Liberation Movement or with Palestinian factions or mediators or guarantors, as well as agreements or memorandum of understanding in regard Lebanon. So we are used to the non-commitment. So we warned from the beginning that if we need a guarantee, there must be monitor mechanisms, implementation mechanisms, and commitment mechanisms. And this is what all the agreements lack. Also, the main guarantor and the one is able to pressure Israel is the U.S., which is always stands by Israeli government and now stands by Netanyahu's government, and it gives it pretexts for the non-commitment. So it approves the pretext provided by the Israeli government, and all of this is because regardless of interpretations by Israeli governments, for example, in the second phase of Gaza's agreement, its interpretation, it has to be implemented first by the disarmament completely of Hamas, then they will start to withdraw, although that the agreement doesn't indicate or stipulate the disarmament of Hamas and didn't specify the way. The agreement stipulates either to surrender the weapons or freeze the weapons and store them away with the technocrat committee. This is normal, and Netanyahu's agreement, Netanyahu's government is doing whatever they want in Gaza as if there is no agreement at all. So when the countries talk about peace, they prepare the environment so such peace and the atmosphere. But on the contrary, Israel, when the U.S. President announced in a tweet that there is a preparation for the second phase, Israel increased its pace of targeting Palestinians through military operations and dire besiege that is a part of genocide, because daily there is people dying as a lack of medications or diseases such as cancer or others.
Yes, I get your point, sir. Now, just allow me to ask you this. Now, Arab and Islamic ministers have warned that continued Israeli operations could derail the political process. So how serious is that risk?
Yes, of course. The Arab foreign ministers, by the way, especially Egypt, they know and they realize very well Israel's targets and Israel's path, which is the continuity of occupation and displacement ideas. So they realize that this government is based on these plans and ideas. Therefore, they warned, and I hope this warn transfers to mechanisms pressuring U.S. administration to make Israel bind by the agreement, despite all of our comments on the agreements, but in regards to genocide, ending the blockade, the withdrawal of Israelis' occupation to the agreement, to the agreed points, and the reconstructions. All of these are very good concepts, and our Palestinian people need that. But I don't think that this government wants to implement this agreement because it depends on time, because elections are looming, and because it will lead Netanyahu to lose elections. Therefore, Arab countries' foreign ministries warn, drive from their vision that this government is threatening stability, peace, and doesn't want to implement the agreement after the Palestinian factions agreed. And this is a warn to the U.S. that who impedes the negotiations and even Trump's plan is Netanyahu's government.
So now reports indicate that some Israeli ministers are calling for renewed large-scale military attacks in Gaza. What message does this send regarding the prospects for diplomacy?
Yes, Netanyahu's government meetings, or what is called the cabinet, Israeli cabinet. Netanyahu's, first of all, is a personality that stalls, that is so-called diplomatic, and try to blame others. So he uses very well the presence of right extremist ministers to use it as a disagreement to the U.S. So he appears as a peace pigeon, but he has some other ministers that don't want the agreement. So he uses the opposition of Israeli cabinet to this agreement and to go back to the extreme. Also, he uses it in the negotiations in the U.S. or to evade implementing the agreement. We know that all the Israeli parties now started elections campaign, and Ms. Hala, the main axis in the Zionist campaigns is to what extent they uphold the Palestinian cause and the settlements, and also, therefore, majorities of Israeli ministers, they want to tighten the grip, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza, and to continue in their settlements widening.
Well, Arab countries have also renewed their rejection of Israeli measures aimed at altering the historical and legal status of Jerusalem. So why does Jerusalem remain central to any future political settlements?
Because Jerusalem is a religious city for Christians, Muslims, and Jews, so it's the struggle point, main point. So since Netanyahu's government was created, there is attempts to Zionize the Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque and all of these religious sites by closing these sites and separating it to allow Ben Ghafir and other settlers and other extremist ministers to pray inside the campus of the mosque. This government is one of the most extremist governments in targeting Al-Aqsa Mosque and its citizens by tightening the life on the citizens, destroying Palestinian buildings and homes by depriving them from the citizenship inside the city, and creating Arab areas inside the city, and isolating the city from other areas in the West Bank. There is settlements isolating the mosque right now, being established right now, isolating it from the West and central West Bank. There is new settlements to completely isolate the mosque or the Jerusalem from Al-Khalam, with connecting it to occupied areas since 48, and connecting to Jordan, and other than that. So they realized that Jerusalem and trying to change its geographical and demographic nature is a very dangerous indication, and the attempt to control religious rights and not to allow the Hashemite control to go on in their work as signed in the agreement. So this sponsor is approved for years, and Eastern Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, approved by the UN, the Justice Court, which is considered occupied territories from Palestine, and we cannot be treated as Israel Netanyahu's want. And Trump recognized Jerusalem as a capital, unified capital for Israel. So Jerusalem is the main point in the crisis or the conflict between us and Israel.
Israeli officials have reportedly discussed the possibility of resuming broader strikes despite existing diplomatic initiatives. How could such discussions affect the ongoing mediation efforts?
Any talks, Mrs. Hala, in regards of renewing the attacks, although the attacks haven't stopped, this is manipulation of words. They try to appear as being committed to the agreement, although they daily breach it. Since Sharm el-Sheikh's agreement, there is more than 2,500 violations were made by Israel in the main form of the agreement, that by signing upon signature of this agreement, complete ceasefire should enter into effect. But it hasn't stopped by Israel. Palestinian factions completely committed to the agreement, but Israel till now, until this very moment, did not commit to ceasefire and will not commit to any terms in regards to Sharm el-Sheikh phase, in regards except for exchange of hostages, although they tried to evade and stall and change the names of Palestinians and not releasing the Palestinian leaders inside the prisons. And so this wording of continuing operations, military operations, did not stop. Maybe the assassination space have decreased, but did the Palestinian are the Palestinians safe? Even in the 30%, they besiege and they disallow the entrance of humanitarian aid. I do not think that Palestinians live peace with ceasefire, despite Trump's plan or Trump's
Yes.
peace agreement, and despite the implementation of second phase.
Well, that was Mr. Nouman Al-Abed, political analyst. Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable insights. From Ukraine's diplomatic push and brutal winter siege to collapsing peace efforts amid escalating violence in Gaza and the West Bank, today's crises share a grim reality. Fragile diplomacy is buckling under force as global shockwaves ripple and tragic humanitarian tolls mount. The world watches to see if negotiations can survive the freeze. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of In Focus. My name is Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.